Good afternoon. My name is Arlen Lewis, and I'm a partner in the Birmingham, Alabama office of Blueprint Construction Council. I'm the chair of the ABA Forum on Construction Law. So on behalf of the forum, I'd like to welcome you to the final installment of the forum's award-winning Diversity and Inclusion Brunch series, featuring a panel of law firm executive leadership, including Lori Baggett, formerly with Carlton Fields and now Associate General Counsel at PODS, Michelle Lipkowitz of Saul Ewing, Alan Estes of Gordon Reese, and Rashida McMurray Abdullah of Wiley. Now, the ABA Forum on Construction Law is the largest organization of construction lawyers in the world and serves as a thought leader and resource to the construction industry. Diversity and inclusion is a priority for the forum, and we consistently take action to enhance participation, inclusion, and leadership opportunities for attorneys of diverse backgrounds in construction law through our programs, publications, and other initiatives. The forum offers several scholarships, fellowships, and leadership development programs to enhance diversity among construction lawyers. If you're not yet a member of the forum or an affiliate, I invite you to join our organization and you participate more fully in our ongoing programs to support the construction industry. You can do so by going to americanbar.org and searching for the Construction Law tab. Now, on a broader scale, the forum is committed to raising awareness and understanding of the vital role that diversity plays in the construction industry. For many years, the forum has featured a broad spectrum of prominent keynote diversity speakers at each of its national meetings, ranging from civil rights lawyer Fred Gray, Nobel laureate Stephen Chu, the Right Honorable Beverly McLaughlin, the first woman to serve as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, and Vicki O'Leary, an iron worker and 2019 ENR Award of Excellence winner for her efforts to combat harassment on construction project sites. Recently, the forum dedicated one of its national meetings exclusively to issues of inclusion, diversity, and professionalism within the construction industry. At the core of the forum are principles of respect, professionalism, inclusion, and collegiality, in addition to race, gender, ethnicity, and other categories traditionally associated with diversity and inclusion. We also value the diversity of ideas, perspectives, and opinions. For the past several months, the Diversity Brunch series has featured a one-hour conversation with keynote speakers who provide insight into issues of diversity, inclusion, construction, and the legal industry. In February 2021, the forum received the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Champions Award from the ABA Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the Profession for the development and implementation of this series of discussions. We'd like to thank Nick Holmes, chair of the forum's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, for his support in the development of this series. Likewise, we want to thank Tamara Harrington, LaShonda Williams, Colleen Hardison, and all of our forum staff for helping to make this program a reality. Now with that, let's get into our session. I'm pleased to introduce the person principally responsible for organizing today's session, our moderator, Barbara Werther, a member of SAMEC, Werther and Mills. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Arlen. So we're going to start with a really hard issue here. And hopefully Alan Estes will be able to log in. He's having a little bit of difficulty, but if not, we'll on with the show. In the 2016 NFL season, Colin Kaepernick, then the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, sat or took a knee during the playing of the national anthem in protest of police brutality and racial inequality in the United States. Instead of his actions starting a conversation, he was vilified by the NFL and then by Mr. Trump. In 2020, the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many others served as a catalyst for many organizations stating their commitment to addressing racial injustice. The NFL settled with Kaepernick in 2019, but it wasn't until 2020 that Roger Goodell apologized to Kaepernick, or the NFL acknowledged that it had been wrong in 2016. So the question on the table is, why did it take deaths in 2020 to focus the conversation? Who wants to start?
Barbara, I'm happy to get the conversation going. I think it's very interesting. It seems like 2016 was such a long time ago. And in the past year, we've seen more change, I would say, in the last 12 months than we've seen in probably in the last 20 years. With the announcement, I don't know if anybody's had to see, but tomorrow will become the 12th federal holiday, with Juneteenth actually becoming a holiday. And that seemed unfathomable, right, in May of 2020. I think what it was is the combination of, we've talked about definitely in our prep calls, that intersection between understanding we were in a pandemic, people were socially isolated, but then there was an awakening of people seeing for the first time in many of their lives to recognize, what is this injustice that people are talking about? And I know it's making me feel uncomfortable, but right now, if I'm stuck in my home, I'm already very uncomfortable. And it really allowed people to peel back the onion, so to speak, and really start to see the perspectives from other people to really have that conversation. So being a diversity professional full time, I'm excited that we're having this conversation. And I do recognize and appreciate that it's hard for many people who may not have known the history or even understand, the nature of how we got there in 2020.
Yeah. I'll just reinforce what Rashida was saying. I think it was just the perfect storm between the 24-hour news cycle that we've all gotten accustomed to and people being isolated due to the pandemic. People were forced to see what many of us have known for decades and decades. And I could not be more excited either. I really see a lot of this as opportunities to have conversations, real conversations.
Welcome, Alan. Glad you could get in. Do you have a point of view on Colin Kaepernick?
I think history proved him right. It was a critical time with respect to the news media, as Michelle said, and he was ahead of everybody else in terms of what was needed to be focused on. And unfortunately, due to the events we witnessed last summer, history proved him correct.
So we're going to turn to our first real topic. It's the business case for diversity. And Rashida, could you start us off, please, with what is the business case for diversity?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. And I think that's a really good place for us to level set. I think that actually the business case for diversity has been going through a significant evolution, particularly in the last 6 to 7 months. Initially, it really was looking at understanding that particularly individuals with either racial, ethnic, all kinds of diversity, you experience the world differently. And so when you're coming to solve our clients' very complex problems, a lot of that has kind of a personal human condition that is fixed within a business problem. And when you are able to bring together a team that's not homogeneous in their thought process, not homogeneous in their experiences, you're actually able to come up with a better solution. You'll be able to really find and not have the blind spot. So there have been a lot of reports. Most recently, I think the 2020, which was McKinsey & Company, did a diversity wins, how inclusion matters. And doing specifically running the data, doing an analysis on the performance and whether it was financial, whether it was other metrics within an organization, and notice time after time, organizations that were more diverse or organizations that either had a greater percentage of women leading it always got better financial results. And at a significant point, 30% to 25% better performance, and who doesn't want a better 25 to 30% performance? So it really goes to it. It's a no-brainer for us to be really thinking about the diversity of our teams. Our world is global, and what we saw from 2020 is, from a technology standpoint, we're all very connected. And so if we're continuing to try to expand our businesses and play in different spaces, we need to make sure that we are really understanding the full dynamics of the issues that we're facing or our clients facing, and be able to help them narrate through that. So I think most people now have really accepted the business case for diversity, but accepting and putting into practice is probably for more of the conversation we're going to have today.
So Michelle, why don't you talk about putting into practice the business case for diversity?
Absolutely. So to bolster what Rashida was saying, one of my favorite quotes I like to cite to McKinsey every year for as long as I can remember, that diversity in management positions increases profitability. So when you're talking to law firm management and law firm leadership, I mean, you should be able to begin and end right there with that quote. That being said, how do we put it into action? There are a couple different routes we can take. One thing that a lot of us have found successful recently is going by Mansfield and becoming members of Mansfield. So we're in like company with people who are really focused on pushing forward diversity. Mansfield was kind of an offshoot of the Rooney Rule. It was formed through Diversity Lab, and the goal of the Mansfield Rule is to boost the representation of diverse leaders in law firm leadership by broadening the pool of candidates that are considered so that we can get to those 30% breakpoints, for example, in terms of effectiveness.
So, Alan, you play a role in the management of your firm. What steps is your firm taking to advance diverse talent into management? You're on mute. Our favorite saying, you're on mute.
We took a look at Mansfield and other programs like it and decided to incorporate our own version of it, so to speak. We have a program called LEAD, which stands for Leadership, Equality, and Diversity. And what our program is designed to do is take people from the recruitment stage, make sure they have enough mentorship to be ready to be partners in the firm, and then develop that talent over time and make sure that when there is an opening for a leadership position, for example, that these people get considered, but we're grooming them over time to be in position and be considered so that there's no excuses in terms of people not having opportunities. So that's one of the things that we do is it's kind of a ground up operation, fairly new. We put it in place this year. And so I'm one of the people in charge of implementing it. And it's fantastic because I think the mentor piece is the biggest piece that's often not looked at. You know, sometimes you have diverse people in your organizations already, and they're not getting the proper grooming, mentorship, information so that they can succeed. And so we looked at that and said, well, we really need to make sure that that's taken care of.
Yeah, Alan just hit on something that is extremely important, which is mentorship and sponsorship. And while you cannot assign sponsors per se, there's an organic component to that relationship, you can be very strategic in how you assign mentoring relationships with the goal and hope that they develop into sponsorship. Because I agree, that is the critical part in terms of retention and promotion and giving people the visibility and the opportunities to grow into these leadership positions. I will say I'm very proud of our firm. Through similar programming, including Mansfield, we for the first time have 2 diverse lawyers on our executive committee, and I'm one of them. So we've actually made significant progress over the past few years.
And Lori, you were the first woman of color on the Carlton Fields executive committee. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
And so can you tell us about that experience and what your takeaway is from that?
So it was brief, unfortunately, but I think a lot of what, and I'm enjoying this conversation. I just love hearing you guys talk about this stuff. I think the one thing I like that was said is the mentorship versus the sponsorship. You know, it is so hard, and firms try to force the sponsorship. And I wish that were a easier thing to do in big law, but it's just not. But I do think that the conversation that has been helpful is opening people's eyes to the business case, is making more of the big, huge rainmakers realize why they should want to sponsor more than people that look just like them. That it will help them make more money as well, and help them serve their clients better. So I think a focus on that is good. And when firms put people of color in roles of leadership that they deserve just as much as everyone else, it helps do that. The raising of the profile is just like anything else. You know, why did everybody start using Zoom? Because that's what they heard everybody else was using. You know, there are plenty of people who think that Zoom's not great and Teams is better, or whatever it might be, right? So the visibility and putting people that have skills, giving them a platform and an opportunity helps. That certainly was the case for me. And recognizing that life is different for people of color, right? It is very easy to be invisible when you're in big law if you don't look like the majority. And so it takes intentionality from leadership to move the needle on that. And I think that this conversation that is becoming more prominent since last year, I think is going to help with that.
So Alan, you had an interesting story of how you placed someone in a position of, I think it was a management position, and it was something of a challenge, and you had some naysayers, and the person rose to the occasion. Did I get that story right? Can you tell about that?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, what it was more of an example of is the fact, and I think Rashida and also Michelle talked about this a little earlier, dealing with diverse individuals have different life experiences, so they see things a different way. And when you're in a homogenous business environment, especially at the top in leadership, you tend to all start to think the same way. So when you bring somebody in there that's thinking a different way about resolving a problem, it's different. And so naturally, some people say, oh, that's different, it's got to be wrong. This was the case where I saw somebody with a softer leadership style and really advocated to promote her. And the naysayers more or less said, well, she's not, tough, or she's not aggressive, as if that's the only way to lead, So there's many ways to, as they say, skin the cat, not to use that analogy too much. And I think diversity is a huge part of getting other people to see that we can all win. We can all get to the solution. There's just a lot of ways to get there. And some of those other ways to get there bring value with them that haven't been considered in the past. They're different. Different doesn't mean wrong.
So Lori, you've made a big point about embracing all of those differences, and that it actually makes the whole so much better to have all the different components of different people with different backgrounds. Can you speak to that?
I think, it's interesting having been maybe 5 or 6 weeks on the other side, where, in a company of almost 2,000 people, it is quite the tapestry, right? And it is a much larger workforce than what I was in big law. And so it does allow more people. You are going to get more diversity, but even just in that, I can now start to understand in a more real sense what our clients are talking about when they say they want their legal team to mirror what they deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? They're not used to walking into a room where everybody is a gray-haired white man. That's just not what they're used to dealing with. And they know that that's what allows them to get to better results. And we just, with Pods, had our town hall with our CEO today, where she was talking to us about the numbers and what's going on with the company and customer surveys and employee surveys. All of that is us constantly trying to get the feedback. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What is inclusive? What's not inclusive? It all just, sometimes it just takes exposing people to things for them to understand how much more they will enjoy it. And if you always do the same thing, you're always going to get the same result. And I think it's just, unfortunately, for law firms, I heard senior people at Carlton Fields tell me how slow law firms were to adapt to email. The big law is just slow. I mean, they just always want to do the same thing they've always done, but yet they want to talk about how they innovate. And then when innovating, they ask, well, what's this other firm doing? Like, that's the version of innovating. So, it just takes the interrupters and the disruptors to really force people to peel back the onion and see, oh, there is a different way to do this, and we can do as well as we're doing, if not better. And I think it's a more enjoyable experience as well.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts on that. And the way I've been trying to work it through is helping people change their mindset. So, for example, wanting your legal department to reflect your population is no different than you want lawyers who understand your business. You want lawyers who will come on site and understand how everything works. It's the same theory, but for some reason, people have a disconnect when in this arena. Same thing for, it's not negative. You're not taking away from others to give to diverse people. You're increasing the size of the pie for everybody. So I've been trying to work around that cognitive dissonance and help people understand different ways to think it through.
So Michelle, you've got the floor. Let's go on to the second topic on implicit bias, because this is something that is near and dear to your heart. Do you want to tell us about what research is?
Okay, thank you for the softball, because that really does feed into a lot of people think about unconscious bias or implicit bias in terms of negative and, I'm a racist and very inflammatory negative takes. And it's not about that. It's about a natural affinity for likeness. You are naturally drawn to and have affinity for people that are similar to you and have similar likes and backgrounds and experiences. That's biology. Go back to survival of the fittest. So that's what we're talking about there. And the key here is getting people to understand that. So again, I think flipping the mindset a little bit so that people are seeing it. I'm not accosting you. I'm not judging you and telling you that you have these issues. I'm saying we all have unconscious biases. It is what it is. And how do we address those? And just starting to focus on what we call bias breakers in the industry. I'm not sure if Rashida wants to jump in there, or I'm happy to talk about some as well, but bias breakers and ways to stop us in our tracks to think about what we're doing. And back to what Lori was saying in terms of intentionality.
Yeah, the only thing I would also, you covered that magnificently. The only other thing I would add is this theme about talking about, particularly when it comes to bias, because it is understanding that everybody has an affinity to something. And it's natural if you go into a room and you see someone who mirrors you, you're going to be instantly connected. I also liken it, I don't know how many dog lovers we have. I'm always amazed when I take my dog on a walk, right? We're walking, all of a sudden I get a tug. Out of nowhere, he has spotted the one dog across the street that I don't even know how he saw. And I'm not saying that we're all, furry friends, but that whole concept of like, he definitely is looking for another dog. He doesn't care what kind of dog it is, right? But he's not looking for the cat. Sometimes he's looking for a squirrel, but for the most part, he recognizes I have an affinity to this group. I'm going to be part of this group. This group is really going to support me. And the kind of, we always had a saying talking about thinking about pie when it comes to diversity, which is performance, image, and exposure. And so if you're thinking about your career, really most of it is that 10% is really the performance. It's really the image and exposure that drives how people show up and think about you in terms of how you kind of disrupt that particular bias. And even for me working in diversity, I have to also think about my own biases because I've been trained in learning a certain area, but it's always evolving. It's really exciting because you're learning something new. And just keep thinking about the more you interact with people, you're continuing to open and build a bigger pie. And I love what Michelle said about you're going to bring opportunities. When you have a diverse slate, that means that you have individuals who can go out into the market and be able to get another stream of business that you wouldn't ordinarily have had. And so why wouldn't you want to have as many streams of revenue into your organization so that if there's ever a downturn in different businesses, which we all know happens, that's how you stay robust. That's how you stay relevant. That's how you get to the next generation of your law firm.
So
Barbara,
Lori,
the only thing I was gonna add to that is that the danger of people not dialing in and recognizing and learning about their own implicit biases that we all have is that it ends up playing out in a manner where people who are different miss out on opportunities, right? The way big law works, unfortunately, is the people with the work get to give it to who they want to give it to. And so if that person with the work doesn't realize and doesn't try to interrupt and give those opportunities to other people, it just becomes this horrible cycle that just keeps repeating, right? The diverse people don't get the opportunities, and then they don't grow, they don't mature, they don't do whatever the benchmarks are simply because they haven't been given the opportunities that other people received. And so then what do you do? In a couple of years, you're counseling them out and it's like, oh, well, he didn't make it, he couldn't cut it. You don't know that he couldn't cut it if he wasn't given the opportunities. And so if it can't always be the people that look like Rashida, Alan, and Michelle and myself, and even Barbara, that are the only ones dialing in and focusing on this and really trying to learn how to be better. It has to be everybody. Firms have to exercise intentionality on a broader scale, meaning putting in systems, having people like Rashida, people that are going to disrupt and be uncomfortable and have to step in and be like, hey, you can't just take this homogenous group on this pitch. You need to have, other people need it. You're gonna more likely to get this work if you will diversify and give people opportunities and things like that. So I just wanted the flip side of it is people, the younger attorneys coming up miss out on opportunities if we don't make everybody aware of this and dialed into it.
Agreed. It's extremely, extremely dangerous because it happens kind of passively and in many cases unintentionally. So if we're not aggressive about checking ourselves and asking, hey, before I go to lunch with the same 6 people every day, why don't I invite somebody else, or why don't I go somewhere else and try something different, because it's dangerous. And it's the old school, drying up on the vine. That's exactly what happens. It's not a big, massive, something dramatic that happens. People dry up on the vine.
Piggybacking on something Lori just said, about people having the work, giving the work to people. All of us on this call and a lot of us in the audience have the ability to change who actually has the work. And that's where the mentoring comes in. When you're developing diverse rainmakers, imagine that, now you've got a whole different revenue stream and a different group of people that are dictating where that work goes. So that also helps, I think.
So does it have to be in terms of implementation, top down? For example, many law firms are like a club, right? Everybody looks exactly the same. Sorry to say this, but lots of old white guys. And to change that, don't you think that leadership needs to actually take a step, and whether they themselves do it or they bring in an expert to train people, do you think they need to actually implement processes and procedures and not rely on guys like you who, yes, you've made it to the executive committee, but you shouldn't be the ones necessarily leading the charge all the time? Just a question. Anyone, Bueller?
Yes. I mean, I guess I would say to that, we have our general counsel, and I probably will frequently say we and our, because I was at Carlton Fields for almost 18 years, and so it's always going to be in my blood. But Carlton Fields general counsel, often around Martin Luther King Jr. Day, will remind us with an email from a former partner who is now a federal judge, African-American Judge Mary Stinson Scriven. And when she was at the firm, I guess she would send an email with some sort of reminder, some nice message. A lot of people do this at the firms on various days. And so he had asked her if she would send him something that he could send around. And she responded and said, that it probably wouldn't be appropriate given her role as a federal judge at the time. But she made the point to him that at any rate, it would probably be more impactful if you did it as a white man, right? If you said to everyone how important it is to you to recognize this, right? So in a lot of ways, it is more impactful and important and significant when majority people take up the mantle and say, this is important. This is what we should do. This is right. I need to disrupt this. I need to think about it before I do it. Am I excluding people even in my analysis of choosing? And maybe you still land on giving that case or that work to the same person. But if you don't start interrupting the thought process and making yourself think differently and broader, it's never going to be anybody but that person. I mean, there were in so many instances when, the same 2 or 3 associates would be loaded up with work, and there's still people wouldn't want to go to other people. and it's like, why? Like, give other people an opportunity. Have you ever tried? I mean, maybe if you give them an opportunity, and yes, they might have to make a mistake or 2, but I bet those other associates made a mistake or 2 along the way as well. It's just you gave them 10 opportunities. And so you've now forgotten about the 1 or 2 mistakes they made because now they've learned from it, they've moved on, but you won't even give this person the opportunity. And when you do, you give them that 1 opportunity. And if they happen to make a mistake, you're, oh, well, that was that. I'm not going to give them any more opportunities. That kind of bias and operating is problematic for us.
Well, Rashida, you've spoken to that study that was done where the paper was the same and it had all the same mistakes but different names on it. Can you address that, please?
Yeah, Dr. Aaron Reeves conducted a study, which I find very fascinating. And most people, when they've read it, intuitively, why it's fascinating, but to actually see it play out, I'm sure was, confirming most people's, concerns and fears. So essentially what happened, and she does a lot of magnificent research within bias, diversity, and all kinds of training, but essentially what transpired is same memo, we all remember being a summer associate, you're writing the memos. Fortunately, our clients no longer ask us to write memos, which is pretty exciting. But the two candidates, two individuals write memos. It's actually the same memo, but they changed the name. And one name, I believe, I am paraphrasing, but I think it was like Michael Smith. And then the other name had a much more, I think, also from a gender and also more an ethnic name, like maybe it was Rashida. And, had the two memos and gave it to a group of attorneys to review the memos. The first memo by Michael Smith, whatever the typos they found, solid performer, has a long future in law, will be a great attorney. The second memo, which again, I want to emphasize that it was literally the same memo. The feedback ended up being very personal to the person and had really nothing substantive to do with the actual performance. And so the comments were, I don't think this person has what it takes. They're not going to be a good lawyer. Now, granted that reviewing a memo can be very subjective because that's what we all learned in law school, but the level of comments and the sentiment of those comments were pretty much the same on both. So it wasn't just, I'm just identifying these little nits in the memo. It was substantively, the tone was the same by just looking at the name. And so what that really proves to us is we inherently have a bias just at the outset of just taking someone's name and reading their work product before we even look at the work product. And then we're making assumptions about that person's performance before they even have an opportunity to perform. And I think what Lori said about the mistakes, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say to someone, I'm only going to give you one chance and you better do it perfectly. None of us are perfect. And so if you're trying to be perfect in a pressure situation, more than likely you're going to make mistakes. And I actually never found an email that, at some point I'm like, oh my gosh, I read that last week. I totally didn't see that typo. And I think that's pretty common. But then it's not about you making the performance and you making mistakes. Somehow that mistake gets tied into your competency, which gets tied into your character, which ties into your ability to be a good lawyer. And so we go from one, I just made a typo, to somehow I shouldn't even be practicing law and how did I get a license? And you're like, how did that happen? And I love Michelle's quote about dying on the vine. I mean, how many times if someone tells you that, do you start to internalize and believe that that's actually truth?
So now let's talk about how we innovate to success with this information. Let's talk about steps like Alan, you've talked about things you're taking on at the firm and how you're going to make change. How do you do that?
Well, look, one of the biggest things that we can all take away as lawyers who are involved in businesses, and a lot of us are on executive committees and leadership roles at our prospective firm, is we know that we have to motivate people, right? And in business settings, what's the most common thing that motivates people? Money. Right? That's why they're there. So if you tie compensation to some degree to stuff like this, where you're saying, hey, look, we're going to try something different. We're going to actually promote diverse people, give them a chance, recruit them, take them on pitches, not just have their name on the performer we hand to the client and then the work comes in and they disappear, So when you start rewarding the behavior that you want to see in your business, you start to see more of that behavior. On the other side of that, when you start to punish the behavior you don't want to see, they go away. So carrot and stick approaches to this type of thing, I think you just have to be very creative about how you go about it, which ties back into why you need a diverse business in the first place, because of creativity. It spawns it. You have more than one way to solve the problem. So Barbara, to get to your question, I think the way we actually change things is we think about how we're going to motivate people to do those positive things we need to affect change. And we think about how we're going to discourage people from doing those things that we know are negative and can actually harm our group, our lawyers, our business.
So is there a backlash to any of the steps that you can take to advance diversity? Is there a backlash at all?
Yeah, there can be, but look, if we get back to the reason why we're all at work in the first place, which is to serve our clients and generate revenue, there shouldn't be a backlash, because if I can show my colleagues what everyone was talking about earlier, that you're actually a more profitable business the more diverse you are, then why would you resist becoming a diverse business? We're all here to make money. We're all here to have the best clientele and have them very happy with our performance. And if we can show that diversity allows for that to happen, then everyone should be for it. You know, the backlash should silence itself, because after all, aren't we all here to be profitable and have a profitable business with a great reputation in the community?
So Michelle, do you see the backlash the same way that Alan does?
I do, and it's shocking to me because we talk about, for example, in the investment world, you talk about how diverse your portfolio is. I mean, this is not a new concept. It's the same concept. So it's still shocking to me that we have to have these conversations, but we do, because people, again, this is a great question to tie together so many of our thoughts. It's about the negative. People see, well, this is going to have negative repercussions on me. You're taking from me and giving to others. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about growing the master pie for everybody. So I think it's that aspect. One thing that we've been working really hard on is weaving diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout all of the firm. So for example, when I run my office meetings in Baltimore, health and wellness is an integral aspect, just like financial wellness of the firm and of the departments and of the office, health and wellness, diversity, equity, inclusion. So just like having, top-down messaging of the import, embedding it in the everyday, from recruiting, retention, development, promotability, weaving the DE&I tentacles throughout every aspect of the firm is something that we've been very, very focused on.
What's Wiley doing, Rashida?
Yeah, similar in terms of, I think our firm has one office. So we like to say, we're wired in DC. And what that affords us is that everybody's in the same office. And so the advantage that gives you is that you have an ability to kind of get to know everybody. So it has that family friendly. However, one of the big discussions that the firm had was, are we big enough to have someone dedicated to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion? Or could this be just sprinkled across, the legal talent or the D&I committee, but really recognizing, no, this really is a full-time, because of the things that Michelle talked about. It is permeating throughout the whole organization. So while some of my focus, I come in and I work with our affinity group leaders, that's not the only perspective. And so how we run it as, I have 3 missions. I focus on our internal, I want Wiley to be a great culture of belonging. I have to respond to my clients like Lori, talking about what clients want to see from their external counsel. And I would say over the last year, our clients are getting very aggressive. They want to see timekeepers. They want to see, is that person being promoted? They really want to know about the journey of the attorneys at the firm. And you're not in a position to write a little canned answer. They want substance, and they are going to know if they want substance. And you don't want to be in a position that you're not going to get the next proposal or not be able to get more work. And the third is, how do we show up in the community? How are we showing up as a corporate citizen in not just Washington, D.C., but overall nationally? And it is about those 3 components, about tying it in. I think what was really interesting that Alan said about, we are a business for profit, but one of the things that are a drainer, it's not just not being profitable as an organization, it is the turnover cost that people don't understand. When you bring in a hire and you don't maximize, or if you have associates and they're not fully maximized, our CFO is very diligent about how we do our budget. And if you have associates that are not billing the capability, and you have someone else who's billing more, than their really fair share, you start to have a diminishing of work product. Why would you do that? That's not really going to move our business forward. And so trying to have those kind of frank conversations where money's going out the door because we're not training people, and money's going out the door because we're not showing up as we need to be able to serve our clients.
Is there billable hours credit for DE&I?
we've just started that conversation, both from thinking about at the partner level from a compensation. So our partners are not so much concerned about the billable credit, but I think that implementing the billable credit starts good hygiene for associates. So they know that the expectation is when you get into leadership, that these are issues that you're supposed to be able to really be able to be intentionally to talk about because of staffing a team, working with clients. And so if you don't get people in the habit of just doing it, and there's been a lot of, research in different firms, which I'm excited to see. So we know pro bono is important. We get, that's like, it's not even an issue. Most firms at least give 50 hours of credit. So we were saying diversity is a credit, important. We need to be giving DEI credit in the same manner.
Who wants to jump in on that discussion of getting credit for DE&I, for billable hour credit? Did Carlton Fields do it?
We did not. We did the 50 hours for pro bono. And we were trying to have that conversation with management when I left. So, but the other thing I was going to say, and Rashida actually touched on it very well, but I was going to mention retention for the very reason that she did. I think big law and law firms in general had somewhat already gotten the memo about you need to recruit and get the numbers in, and then they kind of just like said, now we've enough of that, and didn't do anything to integrate and make sure that everybody felt a part of the firm. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to feel included and loved and like they belong and like they matter. Even as I mentioned on the town hall this morning at Pods, some of the questions that were submitted to the CEO were associates, we call our employees associates there as well, wanting to know when, with masking and COVID, but when were we going to be able to get back to having gatherings? That was, she said she had multiple questions about that. People miss being with each other. And when you're a diverse candidate, it can be just as isolating. There were plenty of days in various years at Carlton Fields where I could go days without seeing anybody who not only looked like me, but looked different than a white person, and so when you're constantly working in an environment where you don't feel included, regardless of your ethnicity or your gender, even just in being the associate or the partner in the place, that can harm your bottom line as well, because then, so you've paid this associate, gosh, what is it now, up to starting at $140,000, $150,000. I mean, I want to go back to law school and start all over again with zero knowledge and get paid those kind of numbers. But then they stay 2 or 3 years and then they go somewhere else. So, talk about profitability. I mean, partners can't like that. The more you can focus on retention and helping people feel included and a part of the team. People don't go to law school and pass a bar or multiple bars and do all this stuff just to kick their feet up and take a vacation. They want to be a part of something, helping businesses, providing legal advice. They don't want to be made to feel like an outsider or like no matter how hard they work, they're never going to be included. And law firms are going to have to get very intentional about putting processes and procedures in place to make sure that happens. And at the end of the day, I feel like, a lot of these law firms, because it's hard, they tap out, and that's unfortunate. Life is hard. Like, get over it and do what you need to do. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
So we have a few minutes left and we'd like to open the floor for questions. I'm looking at the chat, but I don't see anything. I don't know if Arlen or Nick, you are more technologically capable than I am of seeing if there have been questions that have already come in, but our panelists are more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Barbara, you had your point. I think it's a good one that you and Rashida have talked about before about your Toni Morrison, when you talked to us about that.
We can, okay, so let's talk about that. I have the setup for that. So Toni Morrison in the book, The Origin of Others, traces through American literature patterns of thought and behavior that subtly code who belongs and who doesn't, who is accepted and who is cast out as other. In other words, we belong and they do not belong. My guess is, I don't even need to guess, I'm sure you have all experienced that. I have experienced that in other ways, I think more subtly probably, based on religion. But I think you know, that the concept, Lori, as you point out, of being accepted is really, you know, it's important. Everyone wants to be accepted and everyone wants to feel like they're part of the group. Could you comment on Toni Morrison's views?
I thought Rashida was going to do that. So yes, and I will tell you that it was very emotional for me leaving Carlton Fields, obviously having been there almost as long as I lived in my parents' house, as I said to them, for almost 18 years. And I talked about that, right? Like that one of the things that when I finally turned a corner, you know, very early in my career there, I was going to leave and go elsewhere because I was very invisible and was not being supported, loved but not supported. Those are two different things. And you should definitely marinate on that concept and think about it. There is a big difference between people loving you and thinking that you're great, and then, you know, even if they've taken you to lunch, then they go back to their office and still the work goes to other people. And so when I finally started to be seen and accepted there, it was literally the difference between night and day in my career. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating, right? And I was the same person, getting up and going into that office and working hard and being a good doobie and going to all the rubber chicken dinners and being on committee. I was doing everything that I had always done. It's just that people finally saw me, and that made all the difference in my career and in my life. And I got very emotional about it. I did a video for them and I cried and everything. It was terrible, but because at the end of the day, I wanted to make the point of how impactful that can be. If we all would just open our eyes, and whether somebody is an atheist, whether they are LGBTQ, whatever it might be, allow them to show up and bring their best self to work. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Are they going to help us move and store everybody's stuff because we all have too much stuff? Then that's all that matters. I don't care who you love, what you believe in religion, none of that matters. Just, if you're going to do your job, how can I help you do your job? How can I keep you out of trouble? And then we're all going to be happy and go home. I think that's what a lot of people get too caught up in all the other stuff as to whether or not they want to support people. And that's unfortunate. So I think that's what I liked about that Toni Morrison clip. It's even out there on the internet. You can see her having a dialogue with that journalist. It's just so impactful. And Toni and the woman literally didn't even realize. She was just basically telling Toni like, oh, but you don't write about, you know, what really matters, the people that, you know, these other people. And Toni's like, oh, what are you saying? I write about what affects me. Like, I matter. So yeah, I think that we can take that same concept into the practice of law. That's what people want. They want to be accepted, be able to show up, bringing their best self to work, whatever that might be. If they choose to have braids, you know, if they choose to have a flat top, a mullet, whatever, that doesn't matter. As long as they're going to do their best legal work, that's all you should care about.
You know, to piggyback on what Lori just said, I'll get into a little bit of my personal story too. I was at a firm, Olds, Morrison, Rinker & Baker, for a decade. One of the hardest things I did in my career was leave there. A great group of people, great law firm, very, very good place. I needed to be on a bigger platform, so I went to Gordon & Reese. And when they recruited me there, which took 2 years, I told them no for 2 years. I was in a place where they looked at me and they said, okay, now we want you to bring construction law to GSRM in the Northwest. I'm like, wow, you don't already have it. You're looking at me and you're saying, bring it to our firm. That's really big. The problem was there were people that had ideas on what that should look like. So for the first couple of years, it didn't go as planned because they basically told me to do this and I had other ideas. My firm chairman, Diane Caminos, who was an amazing person, very creative, also a white male, looked at that situation and said, you know what, how about we just let you do you and support you? What do you need to succeed? And I think those words, what do you need to succeed, are some of the most empowering words in business, because it not only tells the person you believe in them, but it tells them that you support them with your business. And the minute they did that, everything skyrocketed the other direction. And, you know, I'm a member of my firm's executive committee, first African-American male to be there since the history of the firm, and also an owner of the firm. So those words, that gesture, changed my career, put me where I am today. And I have to thank for that. And this is no small thing. A white male who was very sensitive to what we've been talking about today.
Someone who had the long view, apparently. So we can't end without talking once more about implicit bias, because this is just very amusing but true. Lori, I'd like you to address the your issues with millennials, please.
Well, we don't have enough time for me to address. No, I'm just kidding. So I have been very vocal and speak often about it because I have to interrupt it, right? I don't understand millennials. I try very hard. I now know some of I have to acknowledge it so that I can interrupt it and cut it off, right? It is literally a lack of understanding. And so often it means me asking questions and just acknowledging that I navigate the world differently. If I need to go to an event in St. Pete from Tampa, I get in my truck and I go. Millennials, even though we're right in town, most of them will show up in an Uber or a Lyft because they want to enjoy themselves and partake. And whereas I only think of getting in an Uber or a Lyft when I get on a plane and go somewhere, I travel somewhere else. It's just a different way of navigating the world. And it doesn't mean that they're aliens like I initially thought they were. I just didn't understand how they could just, everything is just in their phone. They don't hardly use paper. And so I make light of it just to show people that we all have it. Just because I am a Black woman, it doesn't mean that I am immune to it. We all have implicit bias. And the fact that I can acknowledge that gives people the space to help me in constructive ways. And I always tried to make sure whenever I was doing any decision-making or strategizing that I included them. So whatever blind spots I have, they see and they can contribute to the dialogue. And now in my new office, one of the ladies who sits right outside of my office, she's a millennial, and it's great. She's helping me keep my plants alive. We talk about it. I've told her that, listen, you got to help me because I, sometimes don't get you, and you may not get me as a Gen Xer either. But we all have them, and it's just, that one I guess is a little easier because people aren't as sensitive about it sometimes. But it's no different when it comes to gender or ethnicity. We have to just interrupt it, acknowledge that maybe you have a bias there, a blind spot, and once you can do that, then you can broaden it and knock it down and think through it, and then we'll get to a better place.
So with that, Arlen, you have now reappeared, and I haven't seen any questions come through, but if there are any, now is the time, and otherwise, Arlen, you're on.
All right. Well, thank you all for, a really, really wonderful discussion. So special thank you to you, Barbara, for setting all this up. Lori, Michelle, Rashida, and Alan for all of your input of what really, really was an excellent and in-depth discussion. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you. And although this is the final installment of this Diversity Brunch series, we invite you to join us for our upcoming forum events. We're all crossing our fingers. We're planning for our forum regional meeting September 30th and October 1st, 2021 in 6 cities simultaneously: Boston, Denver, Nashville, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Seattle. And currently we're planning to offer both in-person and virtual attendance options. Now, this regional meeting will be a unique opportunity for both legal and technical construction training, in that it features both our Fundamentals of Construction Law course as well as Sticks and Bricks, which is more technical. So please mark your calendars. Let anyone know who needs that. I think this would be great for newer or younger construction lawyers or those new to the construction arena. And also mark your calendars for our fall meeting, which is scheduled for October 14th and 15th of 2021 in Seattle, Washington. So with that, thank you all. Stay safe, be well, and a thanks again to this amazing panel.
Thank you, panelists. You're super. Thank you, Arlen.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Is that it?
That's it. It was good.
Thank you.
See the recording button still blinking. Hopefully we're not
Are we broadcasting or just recording?
We might be doing either. I thought that was a great discussion.